Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
Richard Richmond pressed his back against the cold stone and held his breath. The cave was shallow, maybe 10 feet deep, barely enough to hide a man, let alone protect one. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness behind him, a steady rhythm that matched the pounding in his chest. Outside, the jungle screamed. Insects the size of his fist clicking through the canopy. Birds that weren't birds, shrieking territorial warnings. Something large moving through the undergrowth, heavy enough to snap branches as thick as his arm. And somewhere out there, the hunters. Richard closed his eyes and tried to slow his breathing. 19 years old. He'd been 19 for exactly 3 weeks. His birthday had been on the transport ship, somewhere between the colony station and whatever hellhole this was. Marco had found a nutrition bar and stuck a wire in it like a candle. They'd laughed about it. Marco was dead now. Rachel, too. Claude. Danny. All of them. Gone. Richard opened his eyes and stared at the jungle framed by the cave mouth. Green and black and red, where the volcanic vents bled heat into the air. The humidity was a physical weight on his skin, pressing down, making every breath feel like drowning. He thought about Rachel. She'd been the first. They'd landed together, all 5 of them, dumped from the transport pod like garbage. No explanation, no weapons, just the clothes they were wearing and the terror in their eyes. Rachel had tried to stay calm. She'd been pre-med back on Earth, always the rational one, always the voice that said everything would be fine. She'd taken 3 steps into the jungle before the light spear hit her. Richard hadn't even seen where it came from. One moment Rachel was walking, pushing a broad leaf out of her face. The next moment there was a hole in her chest the size of a fist, edges cauterized black, and she was falling. She never made a sound. Just fell like someone had cut her strings. The hunters had laughed. Richard had heard them. Somewhere up in the canopy, hidden by the foliage, they'd laughed. A barking sound, like dogs choking on broken glass. And then a voice, translated through some device into broken English. First blood. The female. Disappointing. No sport. That was when Richard understood. This wasn't a kidnapping. This wasn't ransom. It was entertainment. They'd run after that. Marco leading because Marco always led. Claude watching the rear because Claude was the biggest, the strongest, the one who'd played defensive line in college. Danny in the middle, crying but moving, too scared to stop. Richard had just followed, numb, watching his feet hit the ground one after another, because if he thought about anything else, if he thought about Rachel's body cooling in the mud behind them, he would stop. And stopping meant dying. Claude had lasted until the 2nd day. They'd found a stream and followed it, hoping it led somewhere, anywhere. The jungle had thinned slightly, and for a few hours Richard had let himself believe they might make it. Might find a settlement, a research station, something. Then Claude had vanished. One moment he was there, bringing up the rear, his big frame pushing through the undergrowth. The next moment, the ground opened beneath him, and he was gone. Just gone. A pit, maybe 20 feet deep, covered with vegetation and woven branches. A trap. Richard had crawled to the edge and looked down. He wished he hadn't. The thing in the pit wasn't an animal. Not in any way Richard understood animals. It was all mouth and claws and hunger. Pale flesh rippling in the darkness, and Claude was screaming in a way Richard had never heard a human scream, and then he wasn't screaming anymore. The hunters had laughed again. One of them had appeared on a branch overhead, recording the pit with some kind of hovering drone. Tall, lean, gray-brown skin like dried leather. 4 fingers on each hand. Eyes that glowed faintly in the shadows, seeing heat instead of light. The large one. Better. Good struggle. Marco and Danny had died on the third day. They'd tried to set an ambush. Marco's idea. Find a choke point, use rocks and branches, fight back. It was stupid. Richard had known it was stupid. But Marco was Marco, and doing something felt better than just waiting to die. The hunters had walked into the ambush like it was a joke. Because it was... The net had dropped on Marco and Danny simultaneously, some kind of weighted mesh that contracted when it hit, pinning them to the ground. Richard had frozen, hidden behind a fallen tree, watching as the hunters emerged from the jungle like ghosts. 4 of them. They'd taken their time with Marco and Danny, not killing them immediately, circling, poking with their spears. One of them narrated in that broken, translated voice, while another controlled the camera drone. 2 more. The male resists, entertaining. The smaller male hides. We let him watch. Builds anticipation. Richard had watched. He'd wanted to help, wanted to run out and do something, anything. But his body wouldn't move. Some ancient part of his brain had locked his muscles in place, kept him hidden, kept him alive. He'd watched Marco and Danny die, and he'd done nothing. That was 2 days ago. Now Richard was alone in a shallow cave, listening to the jungle scream, knowing the hunters were out there, knowing the cameras were watching, knowing millions of aliens across dozens of star systems were placing bets on how long he'd last. He had to move. Staying meant dying slowly. The cave had no water, no food, no protection from the things that hunted at night. He'd seen them the previous evening, slinking through the darkness on too many legs, clicking and chittering to each other in some alien language of hunger. The hunters wouldn't even have to kill him. They could just wait. Let the planet do it for them. Richard pushed himself to his feet. His legs shook. 3 days of running, hiding, starving. His muscles were cramping. His vision blurred at the edges. The humidity pressed down on him like a physical weight, and every breath tasted like sulfur from the volcanic vents. He looked at the jungle, green and black and red. He stepped out of the cave. The heat hit him immediately. The temperature had been rising all morning, the jungle transitioning from merely unbearable to actively hostile. Steam rose from the undergrowth where geothermal vents leaked through the soil. The canopy above filtered the alien sun into a sick, yellow-green haze. Richard picked a direction and started walking. Not running. He'd learned that running just made them excited, made them close in faster. Walking was better. Walking let him watch his footing, avoid the traps, conserve what little energy he had left. Not that it mattered. He knew how this would end. The hunters found him an hour later. He'd made it maybe 2 kilometers through the jungle, following a ridge that seemed slightly less dense than the surrounding terrain. His throat burned with thirst. His feet were blistered and bleeding inside his shoes. Every few minutes his vision would gray out and he'd have to stop, lean against a tree, wait for the world to stabilize. The barking laugh came from above. Richard looked up and saw them, 4 shapes in the canopy, arranged in a loose semicircle. Gray-brown skin, eyes glowing with captured heat. The camera drone hovering between them, its lens fixed on his face. "The last one," the translated voice announced. 4 days of survival. Adequate entertainment. The hunt concludes. Richard felt something break inside him. Not his courage. That had shattered days ago. Something else. Some wall he'd built between himself and the reality of what was happening. It crumbled, and suddenly he was running. Not towards safety. There was no safety. He was just running because his body refused to stand still and die. The hunters let him go. He could hear them following at a leisurely pace, tracking him through the jungle like they had all the time in the world. Because they did. This was the finale. The climax, the part the viewers paid extra for. Richard burst through a wall of vegetation and skidded to a stop. Cliff. 100 feet of empty air, then jagged rocks and a river of black water churning between volcanic stones. The far side was maybe 200 meters away, another wall of jungle rising into the haze. No bridge, no rope, no way across. Richard turned. The hunters emerged from the tree line behind him. They weren't hurrying. They spread out in a loose arc, blocking any retreat, their light spears held casually at their sides. The leader, the one with the translator, stepped forward. "End of the line, human. You ran well. Better than most of your kind. But all prey runs out of ground eventually." Richard's chest heaved. His vision swam. His legs felt like they were made of water. "Why?" he heard himself ask. His voice was a cracked whisper. "Why do this?" The hunter tilted his head. The translator crackled. "Entertainment. Your species is new to the galaxy. Soft, weak. You make excellent prey. And the viewers pay well to watch soft things struggle." The camera drone drifted closer to Richard's face. "Any last words, human? The audience appreciates drama." Richard thought about his father. Samuel Richmond, former Army, hunting guide in Alaska for the last 15 years. A quiet man who spoke more to the wilderness than to people. Richard's parents had divorced when he was 12, but that hadn't changed anything between them. Every summer, Richard flew to Alaska. They'd sit on the cabin porch for hours, talking about everything and nothing. His father would cook elk steaks and tell stories about the mountains. Richard never cared much for the hunting itself, but he loved those weeks, loved the silence, loved the man his father became when the world fell away. He'd been planning to visit again after this trip, had already bought the plane ticket. "My father," Richard said. His voice steadied slightly. "My father will find you." The hunter made that barking laugh sound. "Your father is light years away, human. He will never know what happened to you. He will never find this place. He will live his small life on his small planet and die wondering why his offspring never came home." The hunter raised his light spear. "Goodbye, human." The last thing Richard Richmond saw was the flash of energy, bright and white and absolutely final. Then nothing. Samuel Richmond watched the broadcast in his cabin outside Fairbanks. The screen was old, 20-inch display, slightly cracked in one corner, propped on a wooden table he'd built himself. The cabin was dark, except for the glow of the video, shadows pooling in the corners where the light couldn't reach. On screen, a young man stood at the edge of a cliff. Samuel's hands rested on his knees. Still, perfectly still. His breathing was slow and even, the way it always was when he was tracking something through the wilderness. Patient, controlled. The young man on screen was talking to something off camera. Samuel couldn't hear the words. The audio was muffled, overlaid with alien commentary that his translation software rendered as enthusiastic narration. The final prey approaches its conclusion. 4 days of excellent entertainment. Our hunters have performed magnificently. Viewers, prepare for the climax. Samuel's jaw tightened. The camera angle shifted, and he saw the hunters for the first time. Tall, lean creatures with gray-brown skin and eyes that caught the light wrong. They moved like predators, confident and unhurried, spreading out to block the young man's retreat. Samuel watched the young man turn and face them. Something cold settled into Samuel's chest. He knew that face. He knew the way that young man held his shoulders when he was scared, but trying not to show it. Knew the way his chin lifted slightly, a defiant gesture he'd inherited from his mother. Knew the exact shade of brown in his hair, darker than Samuel's own, and the way it fell across his forehead when he hadn't cut it in too long. Richard. Samuel's hands curled into fists. On screen, Richard was speaking. The translation software caught fragments. "My father will find you." The alien hunter laughed, said something back, raised a weapon. Samuel didn't blink. The flash of light was brief. The body fell. The hunters posed with it while the camera drone circled, capturing angles for the highlight reel. The broadcast continued for another 3 minutes. Statistics scrolled across the screen. Survival time, distance covered, viewer engagement metrics. The hunters were interviewed. They described their favorite moments of the chase. Samuel watched all of it. When the screen finally went dark, he sat in the silence of his cabin and listened to his own heartbeat. Slow, steady, unchanged. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He didn't put his fist through the wall, or collapse to the floor, or do any of the things a father was supposed to do when he watched his only child die. Samuel Richmond sat in the darkness and felt something inside him shift, something that had been dormant for 20 years, buried under civilian life and quiet routines, and the peaceful rhythm of guiding tourists through the Alaskan wilderness. Something from before, something military. He stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the snow-covered forest, stretching toward the mountains. Richard's voice echoed in his memory. "My father will find you." Samuel's reflection stared back at him from the glass. His eyes were flat, empty, the eyes of a man who was already dead and just hadn't stopped moving yet. "Yes," he said quietly. "I will." The next 12 months were preparation. Samuel started with research. The broadcast had been intercepted by a deep space monitoring station on Europa, one of dozens that scanned alien communications for intelligence purposes. The file had leaked onto the net within hours, tagged with warnings about disturbing content. Most humans who saw it experienced outrage, grief, helplessness. Samuel experienced none of these things. He downloaded every frame, analyzed the terrain, the vegetation, the weather patterns, identified the species of the hunters through xenobiology databases, learned their name, Verath, learned their culture, pack hunters, hierarchical, obsessed with the honor of the kill. He learned about the broadcast company too, the Quiet Morning Network, named for the planet where they conducted their hunts, run by a species called the Kethvori, slug-like creatures who'd built an entertainment empire on blood and suffering. They operated in legal gray zones, targeting species not yet protected under the Galactic Sentience Accords. Humans qualified. Samuel learned the hunting schedule, the capture methods, the trafficking routes that fed fresh prey to the preserve. He learned which frontier colonies had the highest disappearance rates, which bars and transit stations were fronts for the operation. He learned everything. Then he started preparing physically. Samuel was 46 years old, former Army infantry, discharged 15 years ago after a training accident left him with a permanently damaged knee. He'd kept in shape since then, more or less, but guiding clients through the backcountry wasn't the same as combat operations. He started running again, swimming in frozen lakes, climbing, pushing his body back toward the edge it had once known. The knee screamed at him every day, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. Information could be managed. He practiced with weapons. Not guns, nothing that would show up on scanning equipment. Knives, improvised tools, traps and snares. The old skills came back slowly. Then all at once, muscle memory surfacing from wherever it had been buried. He sold his cabin, his truck, his guiding business. Everything he'd built over 15 years of civilian life, liquidated into credits that he converted into untraceable funds. He bought equipment, survival gear designed for hostile environments, compact tools that could pass as civilian supplies, medical kit, water purification, fire starters. Nothing that would mark him as dangerous, everything that would keep him alive. 11 months after Richard's death, Samuel traveled to Kepler's Reach. The colony was a frontier settlement on the edge of human space, 3 weeks by transport from Earth. Officially, it was a mining outpost. Unofficially, it was the kind of place where people disappeared and nobody asked questions. Samuel arrived alone. Older man, quiet, no connections. He checked into a cheap hostel near the Port District and spent 2 weeks establishing himself as exactly what he appeared to be, a burned-out tourist with nowhere else to go. He frequented the right bars, the ones where the lighting was bad and the clientele was worse. He drank alone, paid in cash, and let himself be seen. The traffickers noticed him on day 15. They were good at their jobs, professional. They watched him for 3 days before making contact, confirming he was alone, confirming no one would miss him. Samuel let them watch. Let them see an easy mark. A man at the end of his rope, far from home, worth more as cargo than as a customer. They came for him on a Thursday night. 3 of them, human, working as middlemen for the Kethvori supply chain. They waited until he left the bar, followed him into an alley, and hit him with a neural stunner before he could react. Samuel could have fought back. He chose not to. He let his body go limp, let them drag him to a transport, let them load him into a cargo container with 6 other captives, 2 colonists who'd made the mistake of traveling alone, a family of 3 who'd been sold by their own debt holders, and a young man barely older than Richard, who kept whispering that there had to be some mistake. Samuel said nothing. The transport lifted off and jumped to hyperspace. In the darkness of the cargo hold, surrounded by the sound of weeping and whispered prayers, Samuel Richmond closed his eyes and counted days. 14 months since Richard died. 2 weeks since he'd let himself be captured. Soon, the transport dropped out of hyperspace above quiet morning. Samuel watched through a small viewport as the planet filled the frame. Green and brown and black, swirled with clouds, scarred by volcanic activity. Even from orbit, he could see the red glow of lava flows cutting through the jungle. Beautiful in its way. The transport descended through the atmosphere, shaking and groaning as it hit turbulence. The other captives huddled together, terrified, some crying openly. The young man who kept insisting on a mistake had gone silent, his face blank with shock. Samuel watched the jungle rise toward them. The transport didn't land. It slowed to a hover above a clearing, and the cargo hold doors opened. Hot, humid air rushed in, carrying the smell of sulfur and rotting vegetation. A voice echoed through the hold, translated, artificial. "Welcome to Quiet Morning. You have been selected for participation in our premium entertainment experience. The rules are simple. Survive. Your hunters will begin pursuit in 1 hour. May your struggle bring joy to our viewers." The captives were pushed toward the door. Some went willingly, too stunned to resist. Others had to be dragged. The young man tried to fight, clinging to the doorframe, screaming that this couldn't be happening. A guard hit him with a neural prod. He fell into the jungle below. Samuel walked to the door without being pushed. He looked down at the clearing. 20 feet below, the other captives were scrambling to their feet, looking around in panic, some already running toward the tree line. In the distance, on a ridge overlooking the clearing, he could see figures watching. Verath hunters, arranged in a loose line, their postures radiating anticipation. Camera drones hovered in the air between them, already capturing footage. Samuel stepped off the transport. He landed in a crouch, absorbing the impact with bent knees. The heat hit him immediately, pressing against his skin like a physical weight. The humidity made every breath feel thick. Around him, the other captives were scattering, running in every direction. Some were crying, some were praying. The young man who'd fought was lying on the ground, still stunned, twitching slightly. Samuel stood up slowly. He looked at the jungle, green and black and red, just like in the video. just like the last thing his son had ever seen. The Varath hunters were watching. He could feel their eyes on him, could see the camera drones pivoting to capture his face. They expected him to run. Samuel didn't run. He brushed the dirt from his knees, rolled his shoulders, took a long, slow breath of the sulfur-tinged air. Then he walked toward the tree line. Not fast, not slow, the measured pace of a man who knew exactly where he was going. Behind him, translated chatter crackled from the ridge. The hunters were confused, intrigued. This was new. This was different. This was going to be excellent entertainment. Samuel Richmond disappeared into the jungle. He was home. Varath Prime Hunter Korvax had killed 47 humans. He kept count. All the experienced hunters did. It was a mark of status among the packs, a number that grew with each season on quiet morning. 47 kills across 6 years of hunts, each one recorded, archived, and sold to millions of viewers across the network. Humans were his specialty. Other hunters preferred the Drellic, with their thick hides and violent death throes. Some favored the Yanari, whose pack-bonding instincts made them easy to manipulate. But Korvax had developed a taste for humans early in his career and never looked back. They were soft, fragile. Their bodies broke easily, and their minds broke easier. Most of them spent their final hours weeping, begging, praying to gods that couldn't hear them. The viewers loved it. Vulnerability sold well. But they were also unpredictable. That was what made them interesting. Unlike most prey species, humans didn't follow reliable patterns. Some ran until their hearts gave out. Some hid and starved. Some tried to fight with rocks and sticks, which was always entertaining. A few, very rarely, tried to set traps of their own. Those were the memorable ones. Korvax stood on the observation ridge and watched the new batch of prey scatter into the jungle below. 8 humans total. Standard extraction, standard release. The cameras were already tracking them, drones spreading out to capture every angle. "Initial dispersal complete," reported Tracker Ven from his position near the drone control station. 7 targets moving in predictable patterns, 1 anomaly. Korvax's interest sharpened. Anomaly? Ven pulled up a holographic display. One of the camera feeds showed an older human male walking calmly into the tree line. Not running, not looking over his shoulder, just walking, steady and unhurried, like he was taking a morning stroll through familiar territory. "This one," Ven said. "Minimal stress indicators, no panic response, heart rate elevated but controlled. He's been on the ground for 6 minutes and hasn't broken stride once." Korvax studied the feed. The human was older than typical prey, maybe mid-40s by their species reckoning. Weathered face, calloused hands. He moved through the undergrowth with an economy of motion that spoke of experience in wilderness environments. "Interesting." "Background?" Korvax asked. Ven checked his datapad. "Captured on Kepler's Reach. No military flags in his file. Listed occupation, hunting guide, origin planet, Earth. A hunter." Korvax made the grinding sound that passed for amusement among the Varath. "How appropriate. He'll understand what's happening to him then. Good. Fear is sweeter when it comes from comprehension." "Should we prioritize him?" Korvax considered. The viewers would expect a certain rhythm to the broadcast. Quick kills early to establish stakes. A few extended chases for tension. Then the finale, ideally with the most resilient prey saved for last. This one might make a good finale. "No," Korvax decided. "Let him settle in. Let him think his experience gives him an advantage. We'll take the easy ones first and save him for day 3 or 4. By then, he'll understand that experience means nothing here." Ven nodded and adjusted the drone assignments. The observation ridge buzzed with activity as the hunting party prepared for the first day's entertainment. 6 hunters total. Korvax as pack leader, Ven on tracking and drone control, 3 shooters, Dren, Solk, and Matic, who would handle the actual kills, and Brennan, the youngest, still learning, assigned to documentary duties and support. A standard configuration, more than enough for 8 soft humans. Korvax checked his light spear and felt the familiar anticipation building in his chest. The hunt was beginning. Below, in the jungle, the prey was already dying. Samuel Richmond had been on the ground for 2 hours. In that time, he had covered approximately 3 kilometers, identified 4 viable water sources, cataloged 6 species of potentially edible vegetation, and located the primary game trail used by the planet's apex predators. He had also counted 18 camera drones. They moved in predictable patterns, sweeping the jungle in overlapping grids. Most were focused on the other captives, tracking their panicked flight through the undergrowth. But a few had locked on to Samuel, hovering at a respectful distance, recording his unusual behavior for the viewers. Let them watch. Samuel crouched beside a stream and filled his improvised water container, a large leaf folded and sealed with tree sap. The water was warm and slightly acidic, but drinkable. He'd need to find a better source eventually, something fed by the volcanic springs that dotted the terrain. But that was a problem for later. Right now, he was building a map in his head. The jungle was dense, but not impenetrable. Game trails cut through the worst of the undergrowth, creating natural highways for anything large enough to push through. The volcanic activity created thermal variations that affected vegetation patterns, cooler zones near the vents where certain plants thrived, hotter zones where the ground itself could burn exposed skin. The terrain rose steadily to the north, toward a ridge of volcanic peaks that dominated the horizon. South and west, the jungle stretched flat and endless. East, according to the brief glimpse he'd gotten from the transport, was a river system cutting through a canyon. Multiple options. Multiple approaches. Samuel moved north. He wasn't heading for the high ground. Not yet. First, he needed to understand what he was working with. The hunters had advantages: technology, numbers, familiarity with the terrain. But advantages could become weaknesses if you knew how to exploit them. The camera drones, for instance. They were sophisticated, nearly silent, equipped with sensors that could track heat signatures and movement. But they were also predictable. They followed programming, not instinct. They swept the same areas at the same intervals, leaving gaps that a patient observer could identify and exploit. Samuel had been observing for 2 hours. He already knew 3 blind spots within a kilometer of his current position. He also knew the hunters were watching him. Not closely, not yet. They were focused on the easier prey, the ones who ran and screamed and made for good entertainment. Samuel had heard 2 death screams in the past hour, distant but unmistakable. 2 down. 6 remaining, including himself. The hunters would come for him eventually. When the easy kills were done, when they needed fresh content, they would turn their attention to the anomaly, the human who didn't run. Samuel intended to be ready. He found what he was looking for an hour later, a section of jungle where the canopy was particularly dense, blocking most of the light and creating a maze of shadows and hanging vines. The ground here was treacherous, riddled with root systems and hidden depressions. A large predator had marked the area, claw marks on the trees, the faint musk of territorial scent. Perfect. Samuel began to work. "He's just sitting there," Tracker Ven reported to Korvax. "Has been for the past hour. Not moving, not building shelter, just sitting." Korvax glanced at the feed. The older human was crouched in a shadowy section of jungle, barely visible even with thermal enhancement. He appeared to be doing nothing at all. Perhaps he's given up, Dren suggested. The shooter was cleaning his light spear, preparing for the afternoon hunt. Some of them do that. Shock response. They go catatonic and wait for death. His heart rate doesn't match shock, Ven said. Elevated but stable. He's alert. He's just waiting. Waiting for what? Ven had no answer. Korvax considered the feed for a long moment. The human stillness was unusual, but not unprecedented. Some prey tried to hide and wait out the hunt, hoping the hunters would lose interest. It never worked. The cameras saw everything. But fear made prey stupid. Leave him, Korvax decided. Focus on the active targets. We'll deal with the statue later. Ven redirected the drones, and the feed shifted to show a young human male struggling through a swamp 3 kilometers to the south. This one was crying, stumbling, clearly approaching exhaustion. Much better content. Korvax assembled his hunting party and descended into the jungle. The young man's name was Eric Brandt, 22 years old, engineering student from a colony in the Tau Ceti system. He'd been traveling to visit his sister on Kepler's Reach when the traffickers took him. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong species. Samuel learned this because Eric wouldn't stop talking. They'd crossed paths near a thermal vent, where the ground was warm enough to dry wet clothing, and the sulfur smell masked other scents. Eric had stumbled into the clearing, wild-eyed and desperate, and had immediately latched on to the first human he'd seen. "Thank God," Eric gasped, clutching Samuel's arm. "Thank God. I thought I was alone. I thought everyone was dead. We have to stay together. We have to find a way out of here. My sister, she's waiting for me. She doesn't know what happened." Samuel listened without responding. Eric was in bad shape, dehydrated, exhausted, a gash on his forehead where he'd walked into a branch. His hands were shaking, and his eyes kept darting to the canopy, searching for threats. He wouldn't last another day. "Please," Eric said, "you seem like you know what you're doing. You're not panicking like the others. Help me. Help me get out of here." Samuel looked at the young man, saw the fear, the desperation, the hope. He thought about Richard. Richard had probably felt this same fear, this same desperate need for someone to help him, had probably looked for someone, anyone, who could make sense of the nightmare and find a way out. No one had helped Richard. Samuel felt something crack in his chest, a splinter of the old him, the father, the protector, pushing through the cold. "What's your name?" Eric Brandt." Samuel nodded slowly. "Okay, Eric. Listen to me carefully. Go east. There's a river system about 5 kilometers that direction. Follow it downstream, but stay off the banks. Use the tree line for cover. The canyon walls will block some of the drone angles." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of the edible roots he'd collected earlier, pressed them into Eric's shaking hands. "These are safe to eat. Don't drink the water unless it's moving fast and clear. Rest during the hottest part of the day. Move at dawn and dusk, when the thermal sensors have the most interference." Eric clutched the roots like they were made of gold. "Will you come with me? Please. I don't want to be alone." Samuel wanted to say yes. He wanted to protect this kid the way no one had protected Richard, wanted to guide him through the jungle, keep him alive, give him the chance his son never had. But he couldn't. If Samuel went east, he abandoned the mission. The hunters would live. Korvax would live. The Quiet Morning Network would continue broadcasting human deaths for entertainment. More sons would die screaming while their fathers watched helplessly from light years away. Eric might survive if Samuel helped him. Millions wouldn't. "I can't," Samuel said. The words tasted like ash. "I have something I need to do. Something that might stop this from happening to anyone else." Eric's face crumpled. "But east. Stay smart. Stay quiet." Samuel gripped the young man's shoulder once, firm and brief. "Survive, Eric. That's how you win." He turned and walked north. Behind him, Eric called out once, twice. Then the sounds faded as the young man headed east, following the only advice anyone had given him. Samuel kept walking. He told himself Eric had a chance. The river route was real. The advice was solid. If the kid stayed smart, stayed quiet, he might make it longer than the others. But Samuel had been a hunter for 30 years. He knew the odds. And he knew that sometimes, no matter how much you wanted to help, the best you could offer wasn't enough. The hunters found Eric Brandt near the river canyon at sunset. Samuel was 2 kilometers away, in a tree, watching through a gap in the canopy. He couldn't see the details at this distance, but he could hear the screams. Eric lasted longer than expected. 3 minutes, maybe 4. The hunters seemed to be taking their time, playing with him, making a show for the cameras. Samuel could hear the barking laughter echoing through the jungle, the translated taunts, the wet sounds of violence. Then silence. Samuel climbed down from the tree and continued his work. By his count, 4 captives remained alive, himself and 3 others, scattered somewhere in the vast expanse of the hunting preserve. The hunters would likely continue picking off the easy targets tomorrow, saving Samuel for later in the week. That gave him time. The trap he was building was simple in concept, complex in execution. A deadfall, triggered by a trip line, designed to drop a weighted log onto anything that passed beneath it. Basic wilderness survival technique, the kind of thing he'd taught to tourists in Alaska. But this version had modifications. The trip line wasn't at ground level, where a careful hunter might spot it. It was at knee height, anchored to a vine that blended with dozens of others hanging from the canopy. The trigger mechanism was mechanical, no electrical signature for sensors to detect. The kill zone was in a natural choke point between 2 rock formations, a spot that any tracker would use to follow prey moving north. And the log wasn't just weighted. Samuel had spent hours carving stakes from hardwood, sharpening them to points, embedding them in the underside of the log. When it fell, it wouldn't just crush, it would impale. The trap wouldn't kill a Varath instantly. They were too tough for that, their leathery skin and dense musculature providing natural armor. But it would wound, immobilize, create noise that would attract the predators Samuel had heard hunting in this section of the jungle. Nature would finish what the trap started. Samuel tested the mechanism one final time, confirmed the trip line's tension, then melted back into the shadows. He climbed a tree 50 meters away, wedged himself into a fork between branches, and settled into wait. The night sounds of the jungle surrounded him, clicking insects, distant roars, the constant rustle of things moving through the undergrowth. The heat had faded slightly with sunset, but the humidity remained, pressing against his skin like a deep blanket. Samuel closed his eyes. He didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. But he let his mind drift into a half-aware state, conserving energy while remaining alert to any change in his surroundings. It was a skill he'd learned in the army, perfected during long nights on ambush, refined over 15 years of guiding hunters through the Alaskan wilderness. Patience was a weapon. Samuel had plenty of it. The trap was triggered at dawn. Samuel heard it before he saw it. A sharp crack as the mechanism released, followed by a heavy thud as the log fell, followed by a scream. Not a human scream! Samuel dropped from his tree and moved toward the sound, fast but careful, keeping to the shadows. The morning light filtered through the canopy in pale green shafts, illuminating the mist that rose from the jungle floor. He reached the trap in under a minute. The hunter was still alive. It was one of the shooters. Samuel had seen him on the ridge during the initial release. Younger than the others, maybe the equivalent of early 20s in Varath terms. He was pinned beneath the log, 3 stakes punched through his torso, gray-brown blood pooling on the ground beneath him. His light spear had fallen a few feet away. His communication device was sparking, damaged by the impact. The hunter saw Samuel emerge from the shadows and his eyes widened. He tried to speak, but only blood came out, bubbling from between his teeth in a dark froth. Samuel stood over him and said nothing. The hunter's translator crackled, damaged but functional. "Help! Please, I need—" Samuel crouched down. He picked up the light spear, examined it briefly, then set it aside. He took the hunter's supply pack, checked its contents, transferred a few items to his own pockets. Water purification tablets, a small medical kit, a serrated knife designed for taking trophies. The hunter watched all of this with growing horror. "You," he managed. "You did this. You set a trap." Samuel looked at him. "My son," he said quietly. "His name was Richard. You killed him on camera last season, made entertainment out of his fear, broadcast his death to millions." The hunter's eyes widened further. Recognition dawned in them, followed immediately by terror. No, I wasn't. That wasn't my hunt. I didn't—" "You're all responsible." Samuel picked up the trophy knife. "This is what you do to prey, isn't it? Take pieces of them. Souvenirs. Proof of the kill." The hunter tried to squirm away, but the log and the stakes held him fast. He was making a high-pitched sound now, something between a wheeze and a whine, his translator struggling to process it. "I'll make you a deal," Samuel said. "Tell me everything about your pack. Names, positions, patrol routes. How many hunters, how many support staff, where they sleep, how they communicate. Tell me everything, and I'll make this quick." The hunter stared at him. "And if I don't?" Samuel glanced toward the jungle. The sounds of the night predators were fading as dawn approached, but they weren't gone entirely. Somewhere in the shadows, something large was moving, drawn by the scent of blood. "Then I leave you here. The creatures in this jungle, the ones you imported to make the hunt more interesting. I've been tracking them. There's a pack of something that hunts by scent about half a kilometer east. They'll be here within the hour." The hunter's breath was coming in short, wet gasps now. You're insane! You're prey! Prey doesn't do this! Prey runs and hides and dies! This isn't how it works!" "I'm not prey," Samuel said. "I'm a hunter, and you made one mistake." "What mistake?" Samuel leaned closer. "You took the wrong human." The hunter talked. His name was Brennan, youngest member of the pack. 2 seasons on quiet morning, mostly documentary duties, occasionally allowed to participate in kills. He knew everything Samuel needed: the pack's standard operating procedures, their communication frequencies, their patrol patterns, their camp location near the eastern ridge. He also knew that the pack leader, Korvax, had personally supervised Richard's hunt last season. Samuel listened to all of it, memorized every detail, asked clarifying questions when necessary. When Brennan was finished, he looked up at Samuel with something like hope in his alien eyes. "The deal," he rasped. "You said, quick." Samuel nodded. He stood up and walked away. Behind him, Brennan started screaming, cursing, begging, threatening. The translator rendered all of it into flat, artificial English, stripped of the raw desperation in the original sounds. Samuel didn't look back. The scavengers would find Brennan soon. The blood scent was already spreading through the jungle, a dinner bell for everything with teeth and hunger. By the time the other hunters started wondering why their youngest member hadn't reported in, there wouldn't be enough left to identify. Samuel moved through the jungle, heading east. He had a name now: Korvax. He had a location: the eastern ridge. He had a plan, and the hunters had no idea he was coming. Back on the observation ridge, Tracker Ven was getting worried. "Brennan hasn't checked in," he reported to Korvax. "His signal dropped 6 hours ago. Communication device might be damaged." Korvax frowned. "Last known position?" "Northern sector. He was tracking the anomaly, the older human who doesn't run." Send Dren to check. Probably just equipment failure, but we should confirm. Ven relayed the order, and Dren moved out, descending into the jungle with his light spear primed and ready. The viewers would appreciate the tension. A hunter, searching for a missing comrade. Good content. Korvax returned his attention to the main feats. 3 human prey remained. The older one, the anomaly, had gone to ground somewhere in the northern jungle. 2 others were still mobile, one heading south toward the volcanic zone, one circling back toward the original drop point. Standard behavior. Predictable. Boring. He hoped the anomaly would provide better entertainment. On the feed, the older human was nowhere to be seen. The drones swept their assigned sectors, but found only empty jungle. No heat signature. No movement. Like he'd vanished. Korvax felt a flicker of unease. He dismissed it immediately. The human was hiding. That was all. Prey hid. It was what they did. Sooner or later, he would move, and the cameras would find him, and the hunt would continue as it always did. There was nothing special about this one. Nothing at all. Dren found the trap site an hour after sunrise. The clearing was small, barely 10 meters across, hemmed in by volcanic rock formations on 2 sides. The morning light filtered through the canopy in pale shafts, illuminating a scene that made no sense. The deadfall log lay on the ground, stained dark with dried blood. Varath blood. Dren recognized the color, the smell, the way it had soaked into the soil and turned it black. 3 sharpened stakes jutted from the underside of the log, 2 of them snapped off at the base. But there was no body. Dren circled the site slowly, his light spear raised, eyes scanning the shadows. The ground told a story. Impact marks where something heavy had fallen, drag marks leading toward the eastern tree line, scattered equipment fragments, and tracks. Not Varath tracks. Something else. Multiple somethings, moving in a pack formation, converging on the site from several directions. Scavengers. The jungle's cleanup crew, drawn by the scent of blood and weakness. They'd found Brennan before anyone else could. Dren activated his communication device. "Pack leader, I've found the site." Korvax's voice crackled through the speaker. "Report. Trap. Deadfall with embedded stakes. Brennan triggered it. Blood everywhere, but no body. Scavengers got to him." A long pause. "A trap," Korvax repeated. "You're telling me Brennan walked into a trap? That's what the evidence shows." Brennan was trained. He knew this terrain. He wouldn't walk into a trap set by prey. Dren looked at the sharpened stakes, at the careful placement of the tripline anchor points, at the kill zone positioned perfectly between the rock formations, exactly where a tracker would walk. "This wasn't a panic trap," he said slowly. "This was built by someone who knew what they were doing." Another pause. Longer this time. "Return to base. We'll discuss this in person." The communication cut off. Dren took one last look at the trap site, the blood, the drag marks, the stakes carved with patient, methodical precision. Something cold settled into his chest. He turned and headed back toward the ridge. He never made it. Samuel had been following Dren for 2 hours. It wasn't difficult. The Varath hunter moved with confidence, following established trails, checking his scanner periodically for threats. He was good, professional. But he was looking for prey behavior, flight, panic, hiding. He wasn't looking for a predator. Samuel kept 50 meters back, using the terrain for concealment. The jungle provided plenty of cover: fallen trees, volcanic outcroppings, dense undergrowth that swallowed sound and sight. He moved when Dren moved, stopped when Dren stopped, matched his rhythm perfectly. Patience. The Varath had technology, sensors, scanners, communication devices that could call for backup in seconds. A direct confrontation would be risky. Samuel needed to close the distance without being detected, needed to strike before Dren could react. He needed the perfect moment. It came near a stream crossing. Dren paused at the water's edge, checking his scanner, confirming the route back to base. The stream was shallow but fast-moving, fed by volcanic springs somewhere upstream. The noise of the water masked smaller sounds. The rocky banks provided limited sight lines, and Dren had to look down to navigate the crossing. Samuel moved. 30 meters. 20. 10. Dren was ankle-deep in the stream, picking his way across the slippery rocks. His attention split between his footing and his scanner. 5 meters. Samuel drew the trophy knife. Dren heard something. Started to turn. His hand moved toward his light spear. Too slow. Samuel hit him from behind, one arm wrapping around the Verath's throat, the other driving the knife up under the jaw where the leathery skin was thinnest. The blade punched through flesh and muscle, severing something vital. Gray-brown blood sprayed across the rocks. Dren tried to scream. Only a wet gurgle came out. Samuel held on, squeezed tighter, felt the Verath struggles weaken, then stop. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then stillness. Samuel lowered the body into the stream. The current tugged at it, pulling blood downstream in dark ribbons. He worked quickly, methodically. Took the light spear, took the scanner, took the communication device and crushed it under his boot. Then he dragged the body to the bank and went to work. The jungle predators left distinctive marks. Samuel had studied them over the past 2 days, examining kill sites, analyzing wound patterns. Claw marks followed specific angles. Bite patterns had consistent spacing. A good tracker could read a predator attack like a signature. Samuel created a signature. He used the trophy knife to add wounds that matched the local apex predator, tore the clothing in the right places, scattered equipment to simulate a struggle, dragged the body to a depression near the stream, and positioned it the way a predator would leave a half-eaten kill. It wouldn't fool a forensic expert, but it might fool hunters who wanted to believe they were still in control. Samuel cleaned the knife in the stream and disappeared into the jungle.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.